Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Weave webinar today, Assessment Paper Pusher to Improvement Hero, The Journey Begins. This is the first installment in the Evolving from Assessment to Learning Improvement webinar series. My name is Amber Malinowski, and I am one of your hosts today. We have actually 6 panelists on the call today, all in different locations. So this has been a kind of a fun logistical exercise for all of us, different time zones, different machines and all of that, but we're really excited to help you get started today with the webinar. I wanted to just quickly show you the Zoom webinar control panel. If any of you haven't joined us for a webinar before, this is kind of what the controls do. So if you need anything, you can ask us questions. If you need to leave, you can just get out. We are recording the session today, and so you will get a copy of it afterwards, and it will also live in our Knowledge Center. And with that, I want to put up some pictures of all the wonderful people we have on the call today, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Ray Van Dyke, our Senior Vice President here at Weave, to welcome everyone.
Thank you very much, Amber. Yes, welcome everyone. We're very excited to be presenting this first webinar in the series, as Amber mentioned, from Assessment Paper Pusher to Improvement Hero, The Journey Begins. And then over another 5 webinars over the next couple of months, we will be talking and focusing on this notion of evolving from assessment to learning improvement. I wanted to start by saying this webinar series is pretty remarkable in a number of ways. First, it is going to be an in-depth analysis of an assessment topic that's constantly on our minds as assessment professionals, and that is, how can we be sure that our assessment work is leading to learning improvement for our students? Secondly, it's remarkable in that it's a collaboration of several organizations that all have learning improvement as a major goal, and those organizations include the Center for Assessment Research Studies at James Madison University, the Virginia Assessment Group and their journal, Research and Practice in Assessment, the Weave organization, which has as its mission to improve student learning through assessment. And of course, the major collaborators are all the assessment leaders who will be presenting these 6 webinars. So a tremendous shout out to all of these groups for their willingness to work together to bring this important series together. The third reason is this is kind of a major step in a journey that started probably some 10 to 12 years ago when 2 kind of run-of-the-mill institutional assessment directors, that would be Keston and me, began having conversations about this topic of assessment learning improvement. That conversation and many others afterwards led to a conversation about 5 years ago about how we might get together some key thinkers in our assessment field to really dig deeply into this topic of learning improvement. From that point, a learning summit involving some major thinkers in our field, the ones who will be doing these webinars, was born in 2017, which Keston will talk more about, I'm sure, which led to a special edition of Research and Practice and Assessment Journal, which then brings us to our webinar today. So it's been a great journey, and we're really pleased to be at this point, and the journey will continue. So before we introduce today's speakers and get started, I would like to introduce one of our collaborators, Dr. Nick Curtis, who is the Director of Assessment at Marquette University, and he is also Editor-in-Chief of the Research and Practice and Assessment Journal. So I'll turn it over to Nick to put up some slides and talk.
Thank you, Ray. And thank you all for attending this webinar. As Ray noted, this is the first in an exciting series on the topic of learning improvement and is co-sponsored by Weave, the Center for Assessment and Research Studies at James Madison University, the Virginia Assessment Group, and the Journal of Research and Practice and Assessment. The Virginia Assessment Group is one of the oldest professional organizations in the United States focused on assessment practice in higher education. Over 13 years ago, the board of the Virginia Assessment Group recognized a need for a professional outlet focused on disseminating information on both the measurement and policy aspects of assessment practice. From this recognition, the Journal of Research and Practice and Assessment, also known as RPA, was born. Now, 13 years later. The most recent issue of RPA, with guest editor Keston Fulcher, is dedicated to learning improvement. The authors of these pieces are some of the foremost thinkers in our field and are also going to serve as the facilitators for each of these webinars. I encourage you to read their excellent work, which can be found at rpajournal.com. I also encourage you to consider submitting your own research on assessment practice for publication in RPA, and to also consider attending or presenting at the Virginia Assessment Group Conference in November. Thank you to both Megan and Keston for facilitating this webinar. I now turn it back over to Ray to introduce our facilitators properly.
Thank you very much, Nick. Now let's jump into our webinar. I'm going to introduce our two speakers, and then we are actually going to do a couple of polls, I think, before they begin, to just kind of find out more about our audience. But I'll go ahead and introduce them now. Our two presenters today are Dr. Keston Fulcher, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Assessment Research Studies at James Madison, and Dr. Megan Good, who is Director of Academic Assessment at Auburn University. I won't take the time to run through their bios because that information was posted on the webinar announcement, but I will just stress the attribute that I think each of them brings to this conversation that's particularly important to the conversation, and that is they are both assessment practitioners who are dedicated to the improvement of student learning on their campuses. So with that, I'll turn it over, and maybe Amber, you will talk first.
Yeah, let's do a couple of polls and get to know some of our attendees that are with us today. The first one that we'd like to ask you is, what is your role at your institution? Are you an assessment practitioner, educational developer, faculty member, student affairs professional, administrator, student, or other? And we'll leave that up just for a couple of moments, give everybody a chance to respond, and then I will we'll share those results too, and I'll read them so that we can all learn a little bit more about each other. I'll leave this up for just another moment. Make sure you all have a chance to share, and then we have just a couple more. Someone just asked if there was an option for all of the above. I like that. Okay, so 52% of you are assessment practitioners, 6% educational developers, 15% faculty members, 3% student affairs professionals, 13% administrators. We don't have any students, it looks like, and 12% selected other. Thank you all very much for sharing, and we're going to do just a couple more. The next one. Which statement best describes the assessment landscape at your institution? I have no clue. Assessment, do we have to do this? Sometimes people talk about assessment results. I see many people making changes based on assessment results, or I see many programs making strategic decisions that lead to better student learning. Again, we'll leave this up for a moment or two, give everybody a chance to respond. Okay, I think we'll leave it up for just a couple more seconds, and then we'll share the results. Okay. 6% said, I have no idea about the assessment landscape, and 17% said, assessment, do we have to do this? 38% said, sometimes people talk about the results. 28% said, I see people making changes based on assessment results, and 11% said, I see many programs making strategic decisions that lead to better student learning. Okay, one more. Which statement best describes your personal work in assessment? I'm barely able to submit paperwork for accreditation purposes, which is a big job. I feel like an assessment police officer. I'm helping the institution meet requirements, but I'm wondering if there's something more. I'm beginning to develop learning improvement superpowers, but they're not full strength yet. With my super friends, we have created a learning improvement universe. or I don't work on assessment as part of my role. I have to give Dr. Fulcher and Dr. Good credit for these amazing questions. They're really fun to read. I'm enjoying this. Okay, leave this up for just a few more moments. And there are 113 people currently on the call. I had a question come in about that, just so you know. We will probably have a few people join us a little bit late as well. Okay. 3% said I'm barely able to submit paperwork for accreditation purposes. 23% said I feel like an assessment police officer. 36% said I'm helping the institution meet requirements, but I'm wondering if there's something more. 26%, I'm beginning to develop learning improvement superpowers. 1% with my super friends, we've created a learning improvement universe. And 10%, I don't work on assessment as part of my role. Thank you all very much for participating. I think that'll be really helpful as we move forward. Once again, if you do have any questions, you can use the webinar chat area, or there's a little Q&A area on the bottom, and those can be for the host, myself and the other Weave team, or for the presenters, and we will have a Q&A portion in a little bit. So I will be quiet now, and take it away.
All right, thanks everybody. This is Keston Fulcher. In just a moment, Megan Good is going to join me. And before we go to the next slide, and Megan's going to lead us on that, let me provide a little bit more context. First, I need to say thanks to Gene Horst and to Allison Ames. So these were the leaders that put the first Learning Improvement Summit together about 2 years ago. And so from that point to this point, we've gotten all these groups of people together to write the articles, and then also to give these subsequent webinars. So a big shout out to Gene and Allison. Another piece that I wanted to talk about is a clarification of the title. So the title is Paper Pusher to Improvement Hero. And one thing that I wanted to make sure that I clarify is that this is not a dichotomy. It's not that you're either an assessment paper pusher or you're an improvement hero, but rather this is on a continuum. And so one of those polling questions really got to that, to say, hey, are you just doing assessment work just barely enough to meet accreditation, or are you sort of improvement curious? Do you have an assessment or a learning improvement universe with your friends? And so our hope is to move everybody up a little bit on that continuum. Something else that you might be thinking about is, well, where did this title come from? And so Megan came up with the idea to talk about the hero's journey as a way to talk about going from assessment to learning improvement. And this resonated with me because I'm a big fan of superheroes. So as this presentation goes on, you're going to see a few references to superheroes. The last piece I'll talk about is the relationship between Megan and me. And so I work at JMU, and I work at the Center for Assessment and Research Studies. And I'm also a faculty member in our PhD program for assessment and measurement. And so Megan began to work with me as a master's student back in the day. And at that time, we were both working really hard with assessment, trying to make assessment better. And the question just popped up, and that is, does a good assessment lead to learning improvement? And we started to really have concerns that that link wasn't as tight as it could be. And so together we started imagining what a world might be like if we really integrated assessment and learning improvement better. And Ray Van Dyke, who you heard from earlier, was also a big part of those conversations 5 or 6 years ago. And so when we tell this story, we talk about it in two different ways. One is a very personal story about how Megan and I have come from being more on the assessment paper pusher side to trying to evolve into learning improvement ourselves. And really, Megan is the hero in this story. She's kind of reluctant to be the hero, but she actually is. And the other way to tell the story is to say, this is a journey for all of us. So if we're practicing assessment and we want to make our assessment practice more dovetailed with improvement, how do we get there? How do we get from, in the worst case scenario, just pushing paper, to the best case scenario where we're a learning improvement superhero? So with that, I'll have Megan start talking about the hero's journey.
Thanks, Keston. And again, I'm Megan Good. I'm at Auburn University. And let me make sure this will advance. So when Keston and I were thinking about this presentation, which is really setting the foundation for a lot of the more substantive presentations to come about learning improvement, we thought it might be fun to use Joseph Campbell's model of the hero's journey. So just as a disclaimer, Keston and I are not sociologists, anthropologists, or have any actual expertise in this area, but we were familiar with Joseph Campbell's idea and thought it was a nice metaphor for the process that we've come through. And so the hero's journey is the idea that when you think about stories throughout the history of mankind, really, they tend, when there's a hero, to follow a similar arc. And so I'll leave you all a moment to read this quote by Joseph Campbell, who put forward this idea of the hero's journey. So as some of you mentioned in the webinar, you might be in a place where everything is okay in assessment land, but you're thinking about, is there something more? Is there a series of adventures that you could come on to? And we thought learning improvement is really the next adventure, and hopefully there will be some life-giving elixir in the mix for us as well. The hero's journey that has many figures that show the process, and so at a very basic level, we're just going to focus on the top 3 areas. So there usually is some type of departure where the hero starts out in ordinary world. So in our case, that's going to be ordinary assessment world, thinking about, for simplicity's sake, maybe just academic degree program assessment. But then there's usually a call to adventure. Maybe the hero refuses the call, and a mentor helps to push the hero over into a new world or initiation. And that's where the real journey begins. And typically there's a return back home. So to use a fairly common example, if you think about Star Wars, if any of you all are familiar with Star Wars, Luke Skywalker at the beginning is in his very ordinary world. There's a call to adventure, but he's reluctant to leave. And then through the help of a mentor, he goes on to a very long journey through a series of movies and ultimately has some kind of resurrection return at the very end. And so we're going to use this general framework for my own story, which is connected to Keston's. So to start with departure, we're going to say that we live in a very heavy assessment world. And so with my own personal story, I became interested in assessment as an undergraduate student when I learned about it and the idea that you could actually make data-informed decisions about learning instead of other types of variables that we often think about, like graduation rates or retention or budgetary decisions. That was really appealing to me. And so I pursued my graduate work at Madison University, where I met Keston in 2010. And I was fortunate to have a graduate assistantship at the Center for Assessment and Research Studies, where I got very familiar with the best of the ordinary world of assessment, if you will. But one thing I started to think about towards the end of my master's program, as I was considering pursuing the PhD in assessment and measurement, was how do we know that we're not just a giant assessment machine and creating a lot of reports that are probably productive, but it just wasn't clear to me that the promise of assessment actually improving student learning was happening. And on some of my more cynical days, I also started to wonder if all of the reports weren't going into some kind of assessment black hole. So it was not clear to me exactly how assessment was actually improving student learning. So as you can imagine, that's a pretty critical moment to think about pursuing a doctoral degree in an area you're not sure it's actually making the difference you want it to. But I was fortunate that, just like on the hero's journey, I found a mentor, and that was Keston. And in the spirit of heroes, we can call him sort of the Yoda of this journey. And I was really fortunate because I think a lot of folks could just say, well, that's a good question, but we're here to do assessment, and this is what assessment is, and we're going to keep going forward. But Keston really embraced this idea. As he mentioned, he was already thinking about, the promise of assessment, and so we really wanted to take a step back and go on this journey beyond assessment and start to explore what would it mean to think about learning improvement. And with that, Keston's going to take this small story and extrapolate it to the larger assessment discipline.
All right. Thanks, Megan. I appreciate your putting me between those two hands. And also, anytime you can be favorably compared to Yoda, That's always a great thing to hear. So thanks for that. So after hearing Megan's story, we're going to bring it back to kind of the ordinary world. And so here's what many of us might look like sitting at the edge of our desks, working through some kind of spreadsheet. And so let me talk about some of the internal pressures that we have to face every day. And so those internal pressures are, let's see, should be coming up here in a second. So we have to work with our senior leadership, make sure that they're happy. We also have to make sure that the proper reports are submitted. And if we're lucky, we're also going to have some quality learning data. So that's where we want to be from the internal perspective. We also have all these external groups that we have to make happy too. So we've got regional creditors, we've got state mandates, some of us even have disciplinary creditors as well. And so we're trying to satisfy all these groups. Some of them are internal to us, and some of them are external to us. And we feel like if we can check all those boxes, that we've been doing a pretty good job. So that's the ordinary assessment world. And by the way, that is not easy to do. So, but then there's this question that looms. So think about the work that you do with assessment, and then think about, is student learning improving in the programs? And does any of your work have bearing on that learning improvement? And that's the question that really called Megan and me into action, because we're saying, gosh, this relationship is just so loose between the assessment work that we do and the learning that's occurring in the programs. And so how might we be able to strengthen this relationship? So as part of that adventure, we said, well, you know, let's look a little bit and explore this area. It seems like this connection might be a little bit weak, but these are just some hypotheses that we have unto ourselves. And so as we started looking around, we said, gosh, there's a lot of people who have similar questions. And so here's an article in the Chronicle by Eric Gilbert. And the article is titled, "Does Assessment Make Colleges Better? Who Knows?" And many of you all who swim in assessment circles know that that article has had a lot of play over the last couple of years. So that's what's happening in the general academe literature. We also took a closer look at ourselves too at JMU, and so we began examining many of the assessment reports that we had. So we looked at academic degree program reports, gen ed reports, and also in student affairs. And what we found when we're looking at these reports over time is that oftentimes the quality of the assessment reports was actually pretty good. But then when you went down to that use of results for improvement section and you said, was there actually evidence that learning improved? Not so much. And so from our own perspective, we weren't seeing much learning improvement with doing a more thorough investigation. And then finally we said, gosh, there's some big time experts out here in the world of assessment, and I'm sure they've looked at this issue. What have they found? And so our friends Charlie Bleach and Kathy Wise were involved with a few big studies. And one of the questions that they had in a study was, well, we think the issue with the underuse of results is because the methodology is not good enough. Therefore, if we help colleges improve their methodology, that people will use their results more. So that was their hypothesis. Better methodology leads to more use of data. And what they found, though, was that even though they could help folks with their methodology, people still weren't using those results for improvement. So we said, that's kind of interesting. And another study that came out a few years before that was in 2009, and Trudy Bonta with some of her colleagues were trying to find great examples of learning improvement. And so they asked institutions to send their best assessment reports to them, and then they would analyze those assessment reports. And out of almost 150 assessment reports, only 9 or 6% actually showed evidence of learning improvement. So that just shows you that how rare it is to, even with good assessment, to see learning improvement. So we're saying, hey, our initial thought about this sort of loose relationship between assessment and learning improvement wasn't just at JMU, but this is really a national level problem. So the next part is to say, well, now that we have this information, what are we going to do with it? And both Megan and I are reflecting back. We thought, gosh, we've got so much to do in our life. She's taking her classes in the PhD program. At the time, I'm managing the assessment of academic degree programs. And as Megan mentioned, and she showed with those gears and all that machinery, like we had this big, awesome machine that was in place. And to work or to tinker with that machine is going to take a lot of time. And so it's just easier to go back to our normal world where we're just working on creating tests and analyzing data or teaching classes. And so this scenario, refusal to the call, happens with superheroes all the time. And so in Spider-Man's case, or Peter Parker, Peter Parker's a high school kid, and he wants to do well in classes and get good grades. He wants to go on a date with Mary Jane Watson. But if you're going out every night fighting crime, man, that really does cut down on your social life. So Peter Parker, more than one time, has sort of refused the call and said, hey, I don't want to be Spider-Man anymore. I'll just be Peter Parker. So we're like, hey, you know what? Maybe it's okay if we just go back to being paper pushers. Trying to think about learning improvement sounds like it's too hard. And so now Megan's going to talk about the next piece, and that's on initiation.
Thanks, Keston. If you'll remember back to the overall model, this is where the journey actually begins. And I'll say we'll start with really just initiation, because as a field, we feel we are all just in the beginning of this journey. But in this area, we think about crossing the threshold into another world, tests that the hero might face, and then partnering with allies and confronting enemies. So I was very fortunate, so again, living in assessment world, having a really strong mentor in Keston, who negotiated a partnership that I could actually have my assistantship in the Center for Faculty Innovation at JMU, which is their educational or faculty development center. And this really was, at least for me, like crossing into a whole new world, because in assessment, we were very focused on working with faculty to create measures, make sure everything was in alignment. And at the end of the day, we were hopeful that these really strong results that they were generating from their assessment process would lead to amazing programmatic changes and all the students would learn more. But what I started to realize more and more working with the educational developers is that many assessment practitioners aren't experts at teaching, learning, pedagogy, and curriculum. And we do have folks on many campuses who do have expertise in this area through our educational development centers. And so I learned a lot about the benefits of partnering with these types of professionals and really examining situational factors that faculty have. So not just to say, here are the results, someone should definitely go use them, to really think about more holistically the life of a faculty member and the departments that they are in, and how in some situations, it's easier than others to actually make change or to create interesting interventions at a programmatic level. Also in the initiation phase, it's oftentimes a hero will go through a test of sorts. And so the test that Keston created that helped us really sharpen and refine our thinking about learning improvement was something we called Fantasyland, or weird fantasy. And in this model, he would often say, let's pretend that your president of your university comes to you and says, I want to have evidence of learning improvement all across campus, and assessment feeds directly into that. You have unlimited resources to do this. In that type of scenario, or fantasy land, how would we restructure things differently? How would we do our work differently? And so we really started thinking about how we could do things differently in its fantasy land, with the idea that if we couldn't figure it out with unlimited resources theoretically, how could we ever pull it back down into reality? And so that was a lot of fun to think through, and really helped us come up with what we've called the simple model, quote unquote, for learning improvement. And simple model is in quotes because it's deceptively simple. But the idea that we came up with at a very basic level is, first, when we talk about closing the loop or learning improvement, we really weren't being clear about what that meant. And so we created a simple model just to help define what that means. The first box, assess student learning at graduation, is firmly rooted in assessment world. It's what many of us that are assessment practitioners are working on. But if we really care about student learning and improving student learning, this assessment has to be in coordination with some kind of change or curricular innovation at the program level. And notice that we're calling it a change and not an improvement, because just because you do something differently doesn't necessarily mean that it worked or that it was necessarily better than what was there previously. So the other critical piece is this third component, which is reassess student learning at graduation. So the only way you'll know if that change was truly an improvement is by reassessing student learning again in a future cohort and noting if the differences in scores is actually higher. In that case, you could call it an improvement. But we do call this simple because it appears simple, and there's a lot that can obviously go wrong in this simple model, and that's why we don't see a lot of learning improvement across our institutions. The following webinars will go into a lot more depth about this, these types of issues.
All right, thanks, Megan. This is a nice time to bring back that hero's journey and superimpose where we are with assessment and learning improvement. And so remember, we start off with that ordinary world. And that ordinary world for us at JMU was this assessment machine world. And so it wasn't until we ventured into the land of educational development that our journey began. And we thought, hey, maybe we can put these two pieces together. Another thing that we started considering, if we go around clockwise, is that situational factors matter a lot too. And so, for example, if you've got a program and the faculty get along really well together and they collaborate really well together, well, that's going to be very important to an improvement process. And if you haven't thought about those situational factors, then you're probably not going to be able to make learning improvement systematic at your university or college. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention too is we stop thinking about what we're doing is just assessment. We really start thinking about an entire learning system. And so by learning a system, I mean the assessment, the curriculum, pedagogy, and situational factors, and how all those things can be put together. And so, as you can see on the left there, that we certainly haven't worked out all these pieces, either at JMU or Auburn or nationally. But I think we're starting to figure out what the components are. And I think that, and certainly the journey continues for us, and I hope it continues for you as well. So this is the next to the last slide that I have. But this talks about the allies in the journey. And as mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, this is the first webinar of 6. And so we have many different assessment and educational development friends who are helping us out. And I've got a comic book also to illustrate this relationship. So on the left, this is X-Men #1 from 1963. And this is a bunch of mutants with different powers who together they can beat the most difficult, most challenging of foes. And so the presenters on the upcoming webinars are your friends, your allies, who might have some different skills than you do and can help you build some more tools yourself. So I'm going to briefly mention each one of these webinars to you. So the second webinar is the more things change, the more they stay the same, and it's new challenges to using evidence to improve student learning. And the two co-facilitators are Charlie Blaich and Kathy Wise. I mentioned them earlier. These folks have spent over a decade working with different schools across the nation to talk about use of results. And so as much as anybody, they can tell you about the situation in the past with assessment and also where it's going. So we're really happy to have them for the second webinar. The third webinar is refining an approach to assessment for learning improvement. And this is brought to you by Monica Stitt-Berg and Jillian Kinsey. And the two of them are talking about, well, if you were to say, write a report and it's focused on learning improvement as opposed to assessment, what would that look like? And so they talk about shifting the emphasis in how we talk about assessment. I think you're going to find that really interesting. In webinar #4, this is why assessment and faculty development need each other. and this is using evidence to improve student learning. And the two presenters here are actually faculty developers, which is awesome. And as Megan was talking about, it was her experience with faculty development that helped her cross that threshold out of the ordinary world into the journey. And so it's Michael Reeder and Cynthia Crimmins are the two presenters there. So we're so lucky to have them presenting. Webinar 5 is considerations and resources for the learning improvement facilitator. So y'all are going to find this one really interesting. So this is about a new position that's not currently in higher ed. What if instead of being just a faculty developer or just an assessment expert, there was a new type of expert, and that's the learning improvement facilitator. And so we're lucky to have Kristen Smith and Natasha Jankowski co-presenting on that topic. And last, we wanted to leave you all with something concrete. So what does a really strong learning improvement example look like? And I'll be presenting with Diane Lending, who's a faculty member in our College of Business at JMU. And she is one of the best leaders I've ever met as a faculty member. And she, along with her super friends, if you will, have helped students' interview skills improve dramatically, over 3 standard deviations from where they were, because of the work they did together as a team. And they integrated assessment, pedagogy, and curriculum across the entire program. So JMU doesn't have that many examples of learning improvement, but this is a great one. And I'm happy that Diana will get to tell her story. So with that, we started and talked about the hero's journey. We're ending here with your allies in this journey. We hope you tune in to see those webinars. And now let's talk about questions. And there's no better person to lead us in questions than the Riddler.
Thank you so much, Keston and Megan. This has been great. I just have enjoyed so much the analogies with the superhero, and wow, that's such a great connection. So let's see if we can get some questions up here. I think either Amber or Jen, if you have some, I think we're going to put some up. Here we go. So we can use our mutant powers to keep faculty and others in line for assessment. So there you go. It's your first question.
I tell you what, I don't think anybody's got mutant powers that are that strong. So the way that I've been thinking about it is it's more sort of an issue of timing and connection. And so what we found is, we can't impose improvement on programs. And whenever you try to impose something on faculty, the outcome usually isn't very good. And so instead, we try to, if I can go with the analogy, is try to actually look at what the superpowers are that program has. So for example, if their superpower is, hey, we can really identify the area that we want students to improve, and they as a group actually have enough motivation to work on that thing, then that's when we want to join in with them in a partnership. But if they are really, if they're having issues with working together, then that's more of a, they're not really ready for learning improvement yet. They need to work on their social dynamics first in their program. Megan, you got any comment on that one?
Not on the mutant powers. I can speak more to our relationship with the Teaching and Learning Center.
Great, Megan. You can take that one.
Sure. Well, it's very fortunate at JMU to start bridging an actual bridge between the assessment center and the faculty development center. And we like to joke at JMU that there was literally a physical bridge separating the two units. And so that's kind of fun. But here at Auburn, we work very closely with our Biggio Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning. And we've actually put out a call, and this is similar to what JMU has done, but a request for proposals for programs interested in doing learning improvement projects. And with about 300 academic degree programs on campus, we were hoping we would get 2 that might want to partner with us on a learning improvement project. And we were happy that we actually got 6 proposals, and we have been working routinely with all 6 programs to first really develop the outcome in a very concrete way. So as it turns out, in my experience, even though there are outcomes on all assessment reports, if you really want to improve it, you have to have a concrete measure. And often the outcome is not defined in such a way that the measure is ready to be sensitive enough to change over time. And so we've been working with our faculty development colleagues to help facilitate curricular conversations across a lot of different academic degree programs.
Keston, do you want to also add? I know that's also a strong area for JMU.
Yeah, and so one of the areas of weakness that we had with assessment in our assessment office is that we just didn't have much expertise in pedagogy and curriculum. And then across campus, as Megan was saying, that we've got these experts who are passionate about helping faculty teach better and come up with great curriculum. And so that partnership, I think, has really benefited both sides. So we, as assessment professionals, had to learn a lot more about educational development, and vice versa. They learned a lot more about assessment. And together, when we partnered to work together with programs, it's been really successful.
Very good. So the question about the learning improvement and the lack of, how was learning improvement defined in the research that showed little had occurred?
Yeah, I'll start off with this one, Megan, and feel free to chime in. So one of the issues that we found when we were looking at the literature is that the terminology was not great. And something that we were finding is the word change and improvement were being used as synonyms. And so it was really difficult to know when somebody had actually seen an improvement, as Megan says, assess, intervene, reassess that shows more learning, or if it was just some sort of programmatic change that had been done, and then it was called improvement. And so, so just a general way to answer that question is to say, if Megan and I have done anything, we hope that we've provided a little more clarity about what improvement is, and that it has to be a reassessment showing better student learning. The other question that is on there is, how is learning improvement defined? That is an excellent, excellent question. I've worked with a few folks, and we have an article called Return of the Pig, Standards for Learning Improvement. And we actually try to define what good learning improvement looks like. And so we break that out in a number of dimensions. So if you want a more thorough reading on the definition of learning improvement, like I said, we gave it a shot. And the name of that article is Return of the Pig. I'm not going to go into the pig analogy here, but you can read about it in the article.
Hey, Megan, do you anything to add to that?
No, not to that question.
Okay. How about our next question? I love the learning system at scale. How do you help departments, police, financial aid, et cetera, that indirectly impact student learning, assess what they do within the system?
Megan, you want me to take this one first?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me, because we are an office of academic assessment, so we don't support the non-academic units. And it's tough for me too when I talk to those types of units, trying to encourage them to think about learning, because in some ways I appreciate that they have goals that are important but not necessarily learning related. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Keston, sorry.
Yeah, so I want to answer this question first sort of generally, and then get a little bit more specific. And so generally speaking, the learning system at scale is an issue in academic degree programs, in general education, in student affairs, and sometimes in administrative offices as well. And so let me start off with the academic example, because I think it's maybe the easiest for most people to get a handle of. But what often happens with an academic degree program is that you might have a faculty member or two out of, let's say, 20 who really get learning, and they really integrate assessment and curriculum and pedagogy. And in their own sections of the courses they teach, they're actually having learning improvement occur. Now, they might not be able to see it, but in God's eye, there's learning improvement that's happening. But the issue is that might just be a handful of sections across this sort of universe of courses that are being offered in the program. And so many students in the program are likely not going to hit those particular courses. So in essence, you have this awesome learning system at really small scales within a much bigger program. And so how do you expand that so it's a complete system, so that all the program or all the faculty who teach courses collaborate and know what the system is? That's a really tough issue. So let me just expand that out. That's really for any kind of department that has multiple people in it. And I would say the first step is there a common sense of vision about what that department wants to do? And then number two, do they understand the system that they're in? Oftentimes I think people are working at their jobs and they're doing tasks, but they don't see how it's related to other pieces in the system. And so the suggestion that I have is for any unit or academic program is to map out the program that you have. So what is it that you're doing, and what effects should that cause, and who do you have to partner with in your different unit to make those the programming that you have in your departments have the outcome that you want to. So I think there's a real shortage of thinking about the actual systems that underlie the learning that we want to have.
Very good. Good explanation. What advice would you give to fledgling a curriculum and assessment offices at small campuses?
I can help with this one, even though I'm at a large campus. So I guess I should just say I was very fortunate to have an experience at JMU where there are a lot of resources. So I had a lot of ideas coming into Auburn, but until very recently, we had 2 full-time folks leading all academic assessment efforts on campus. So that's me and my colleague, Dr. Katie Boyd. And that's a pretty small staff for 300 academic degree programs, and a general education program is our main thing. But we've made it work to collaborate with our teaching and learning center by first just taking a hard look at what we need to do on just for lack of a better term, paper pushing side, and being able to release things that are a little bit bureaucratic and might free our time up to do the more fun and exciting learning and improvement type of projects. And so without going into a lot of detail, just really focusing more on setting our office up as a support unit as opposed to a police officer type unit, which I think is attractive in some ways, because at the end of the day, you do have to submit accreditation reports. And I should also mention that we're lucky that neither of us are the SAC-COC liaison. So I think that is a very strong benefit that we experience. I think when you're doing regular assessment at your best, you're working with groups of faculty, they're excited about learning. And so by having these partnerships with the Teaching and Learning Center, all of those interactions are more of the exciting type interactions that you might experience through your regular work with regular program assessment, but there's a larger goal than just creating an assessment report. And having the partnership with the Teaching and Learning Center has helped us have, well, one, more resources, but two, thinking about the RFP model, we're only working with programs who've self-selected into this process. So it's not like we're trying to have all 300 programs think about improved learning. We're starting with the ones who deeply want to do this type of work, and then trying to slowly branch out and promote that type of experience and opportunity for other programs, and build more proof of concept. So once we start having programs with improved learning, we can sort of use that to market this partnership to a broader area. So I think it definitely can be done, even though it is challenging when you don't have a huge team.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Let's skip down. You can see on the screen, the last 2 questions that are there actually are also about small versus large programs. So maybe just kind of staying on that topic. There are major differences between small and large programs and how they can meaningfully approach assessment. How do you communicate the value of various approaches without denigrating others? And then just you can, one or both of you can segue into the notion of the assessment office in small universities, as we know, often are one-person offices. So one full-time director and one part-time assistant director. And do you think such a small staff can embark on the hero's journey? I love that question.
Yeah. Megan, you want me to take a stab at this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So many years ago, this is starting back at about, I think it was 2000 to 2002 to 2005. I worked at Eastern Shore Community College. And this is on the Delmarva Peninsula of Virginia. So there's this little peninsula of Virginia that's across from the Chesapeake Bay on the east side of the state. And Eastern Shore Community College was the smallest community college in the state. And there were only 16 full-time faculty at that time when I was there. And so I was the coordinator of assessment and institutional effectiveness, and I helped move furniture. And I know many of you all in small schools can relate to that, but you have to wear so many hats at a small school. And so I think that there are certainly some disadvantages about resources at small schools, but I think there's some huge advantages as well when it comes to learning improvement. So let me start on the positive side with some of the huge advantages that you have. What I'm learning more and more is that good assessment, and especially learning improvement, is about having strong relationships with the people that you work with at a school. And so when you're at a school like Eastern Shore Community College and there's only 16 full-time faculty, I mean, heck, I was there, in 2 weeks, and I knew everybody by a first name basis and was getting, brought apple pie, So it's like I had these opportunities to get to know people really well. And so in that kind of environment, you can quickly start learning about what their needs are within their programs. And then you can sort of tailor your work to their needs. So that's one advantage. Another advantage is at small schools, the programs tend to be smaller as well. And so if you're trying to have a learning improvement initiative, the goal is to affect all students going through the program. Therefore, all students have to be affected by teaching some way. So you have to have a lot of buy-in across a lot of teachers. But if it's a small program, there's only 3 faculty in that program, all you have to do is get 3 faculty on board to say, yes, we want to improve writing or whatever that is, and work with a few people. So in that sense, I think it's easier versus like a large institution with a really large program. Heck, you might have 80 faculty in a program, and to try to coordinate all those faculty with each other, sort of like in the different sections they teach within courses and then across courses, is just exponentially more difficult. So I just wanted to say that to you all, that's a real advantage that you have, I think, is that by the sheer smallness of your university, that you have a lot more proximity to the people you work with, you can get to learn them better and can customize your work around them. Now, on the other side is that you're also moving furniture and coming up with class schedules in addition to all your work with assessment or your teaching duties or whatever you have. So that's tough. So my recommendation to you, or actually to anybody at any university, is if you're trying to go to learning improvement, don't make it a requirement that every program has to show a big improvement every year, because you just don't have the resources to actually support that. What I would suggest to start off with is choose a program that you're really friendly with, that you understand each other and you have a lot of trust, and to say, hey, we're going to try to pilot a learning improvement project. And we know everything is not going to go right, but if we both sort of schedule some time and give our best effort, we're going to learn a lot, and hopefully we're going to see some improvement. So that's my recommendation, is to pick a program or 2 that you think that they really want improvement, and then you figure out how you can work with them on that.
Great. Megan, any other thoughts on that, either of those questions?
I think I can address a little bit of the differences between small and large programs also. I think in my experience, it has been a lot easier to work with smaller academic degree programs than larger ones, just because the way of trying to get faculty consensus about what is the outcome you're trying to improve focused on is a lot easier in a small group of faculty, as opposed to, say, working with a large faculty where you're working with a curriculum committee. who then has to get approval from the larger faculty. So I think both are possible. If I could only work with one program as an initial pilot into this journey, I'd recommend folks to work with a smaller, cohesive group of faculty who are excited about the work as a learning process, as Keston mentioned, and then trying to include larger programs over time, because they certainly do have very different situational factors that can be good or bad for their success, but learning either way.
So starting at this point in the journey, start with those sorts of programs, but knowing that as the journey goes on, you'll pull the others in also. That's good advice. So the second bullet, Megan, I think is for you. Can you share the call for proposals for your learning improvement projects at Auburn?
Yes, and that's a PDF. I see someone on the Q&A has found something different on our website, but we have a PDF that I can send to Amber, who might be able to disseminate.
Yes.
But we certainly can share that.
Yeah, I can include it in the follow-up email if you want to email me individually, I'll make sure that you get it.
Perfect. Yeah.
Thanks, Megan.
And Amber, I think, said this in the beginning, she normally does, but in addition to sending the recording, we can also send a copy of this PowerPoint or these slides, as well as other information such as that. And then that also leads me down to the third bullet. Keston, is there a list of references on the topic of assessment for learning improvement?
Yeah, I can certainly send quite a few out there. That's a good question. So yeah, I'll send out a few. Ray, if I may, let me share also a good practice that I've heard about. So we have some friends over at Carnegie Mellon who work in their educational development office, and they actually they call it a canon that they have. The canon is comprised of all the readings that they think a faculty member would like to have with respect to, in their case, it's like pedagogy and curriculum and some on assessment as well. And so we're in the process here at JMU of sort of creating a canon that we think that everybody should read who's interested in learning systems. So I just like that concept of a canon. And if you all in the audience, if you're in an assessment office or educational development office, that might be a good idea to put together if you don't have one already.
A great idea, because there is so much out there for us to read and pay attention to, but to kind of have someone go through and pick out some of the seminal pieces would be very helpful, especially for, as we've been talking about, people in small offices who have lots on their plate. There was also a question, I think that's not up here, Keston, of you had mentioned the PIG paper, the latest. Can you give us more about that reference of where they could find that?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, first of all, this sounds kind of weird, but if you Google Keston and PIG, there are going to be two papers that come up. So the first one is a simple model for learning improvement, WayPig, FeedPig, WayPig. And if you'd like to share an article with people that's an introduction to learning improvement, I think that's a good one. And that was NILOA Occasional Paper number 23. And then a follow-up to that is a article that I wrote with some colleagues a couple years later, and it's Return of the Pig, Standards for Learning Improvement. So that's an RPA. So that's the excellent journal that Nick Hurst was talking about earlier. So they're both available online. And so that second paper goes into a lot more details about what does good learning improvement look like. So for example, it actually proposes a rubric that one might use to evaluate a learning improvement process. And so criteria include, like, are all the faculty in the program involved in the process? And that can be from 0 to 100%. Another criteria is, what is the magnitude of the improvement that's observed? So you could have an improvement, but the effect size is really small. Well, that's not nearly as good as having a 2 or 3 standard deviation improvement if you use that metric to evaluate improvement. So those are two of I think it's about 12 criteria that we consider for evaluating learning improvement.
Great. We're reaching the top of the hour, so I would ask one of you perhaps to address our last question, and that's the fourth bullet down. Have you promoted assessment as a path into the scholarship of teaching and learning?
I can share that that is something that we promote with our partnership with the Teaching and Learning Center, who is especially interested in helping faculty think about the scholarship of teaching and learning. So part of our request for proposals process is we promise lots of our time, but no financial resources. So you have a lot of access to the assessment professionals and the teaching and learning professionals. So on the assessment side, we help facilitate the development of the rubric, and we do the data analysis work for the faculty if they don't necessarily have that expertise. And so we will provide as much support with the hope of creating publications out of these projects. And I think we have gotten maybe 2 different publications related to our learning improvement projects out so far. And I know, Keston, y'all have a similar process with probably even more, especially with Diane Linding's work.
Yeah, if I may, Ray,
Sure.
That's an excellent transition that I want everybody to remember that this is the first webinar of 6. And each one of these webinars is related to an article that you can find online in RPA. The last article is just one of a learning improvement example. And this is one of 5 publications that Computer Information Systems either has currently published or is in some process of it. So they're an example that they've done a great learning improvement effort, and as a way to motivate faculty to be involved, they figured out how to integrate scholarship as well. And so that question is such a smart one, is that you want to align interests as much as you can on these learning improvement and one of the improvement efforts. And one of the great ways to do that is to align it with scholarship.
Great. Keston and Megan, thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. I am so excited to be on this hero's journey with you guys and with the others who are going to be presenting. So I thank you so much for all of us, and I will now turn everything back to Amber.
Just to echo what Ray said, thank you very much for Ray and Nick for being here and moderating, and for Keston and Megan. This was so interesting. I loved your presentation. Really got me excited for the next 5 webinars. The next one's going to be in a couple of weeks on the 27th. The more things change, the more they stay the same. New challenges to using evidence to improve student learning. And we'll do them about every 2 weeks. And so you'll be getting emails if you're interested in those. You can always go to our website, weaveeducation.com, and then there's an area called Knowledge Center. You can see any of our recorded webinars there. And you'll also be able to sign up for the new ones. I'll be kind of updating that page pretty often, so you can take a look at it. If you would like to know more about Weave, we do a lot of different things here at Weave. We have a lot of different solutions to help you with your institutional effectiveness work. We have particularly a software solution that helps with assessment, accreditation, strategic planning, program review, and credentials management. If that's something that you'd like to learn more about, we're going to launch a poll right now, and you can indicate your interest there. And no big deal if not, that's okay too. We just wanted to give people a chance to learn more about us. We've been around since about 2006. We were created in 2003 at Virginia Commonwealth University. And everybody here, Ray, myself, Jen, and lots of other people, are actually previous assessment practitioners. We've worked in assessment and IE offices on campus and came over here to Weave so that we can help other schools do this important work. And so it's something we're all really passionate about here on the team, which is really why we do these webinars. We're deeply interested in this work and really want to help people not reinvent the wheel, and be involved in the thinking about it. If you would like to know more, let us know on the poll. Please do take the survey today. It really helps us shape our webinars and other resources that we offer. We'd really appreciate your feedback. If you have any questions, please let me know, amber@weaveeducation.com. You will be getting a recording and some of the other resources we talked about. It might take me a day or 2 to get all that worked out, but we'll be sending that out to everyone who registered. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody, all of our panelists and speakers on the call today. Thank you for my colleague Jen for running a lot of the technical stuff today. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week, and we hope to see you again at our next webinar. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye.